Hi, I'm SpongeBob SquareBun. I don't know who that is. That's not a real cartoon character. It's not a real person. It's just a lot of weird words that came out of my mouth. I think by now you know that I'm actually Mr. Dolce, and you know what's about to happen. Some of you are gritting your teeth. Some of you are excited. For those of you who are excited, I love you, brothers and sisters. Yes, we're about to do part 2 of chapter 9 of the history of New Mexico. But before we do, ever seen a really angry cow? Yeah? Here's one. Angry cow! And moo! Ah! Yes, that was an angry cow, in case you didn't know what an angry cow looked like. And now, part 2 of chapter 9. Let's find out what we need to learn. In part 2, our questions are: what government officials did New Mexico have during the Mexican period, and how well did the government work? Number 2, why were New Mexico's churches in shape during the Mexican period? Number 3, what conditions caused unrest in New Mexico during the 1830s? Number 4, why was Albino Perez unpopular with many New Mexicans? Number 5, what incident started the revolt of 1837? Number 6, what happened to Perez during the revolt of 1837? Did he get killed? Did he get Montezuma's revenge? Who knows? Number 7, how did Manuel Armijo come to power? Number 8, what was the Texas Santa Fe expedition, and what were its results? Number 9, how did Armijo handle land grants while he was in power? Number 10, how did most New Mexicans feel about Armijo? And now, let's learn. Okay, I'm going to open this up on my phone again. All right, now we're doing chapter 9. Part 2, the first question is: what government officials did New Mexico have during the Mexican period, and how well did the government work? Words to know: jefe político. New Mexico, remains a frontier area. The coming of Mexican rule did not make life easy for New Mexicans. New Mexico remained a frontier area. Its people along the upper Rio Grande lived far from settlements in Mexico. Frontier life remained both hard and dangerous, like bacon and eggs. Hard, danger. Indian raids disrupted life during the early 1820s, and as always, there were too few soldiers to protect New Mexico's people. A Mexican law in 1826 increased cavalry companies from 1 to 3. However, the 2 new companies did not arrive at once. Also, because of distance, Mexico's central government only loosely controlled affairs in New Mexico. New Mexico's officials did pretty much what they pleased. In addition, Catholic Church officials in Mexico did little to support the church in New Mexico. As a result, New Mexico's church leaders were left on their own. Mexico's lack of control had other effects as well. Far from the center of Mexico, New Mexicans did not see themselves as Mexican citizens. Left alone by state and church officials, New Mexicans felt little loyalty toward Mexico. New Mexico has its own government. During its first 3 years under Mexican rule, New Mexico had 3 different governments. Then in 1824, it became a territory. It remained a territory from July 1824 until 1837. It was during these years that New Mexico's main official was the jefe político, meaning the political chief. This official headed the civil government. An army officer under the commander at Chihuahua directed New Mexico's military affairs. New Mexico also sent a delegate to Mexico's National Congress. The Mexican central government appointed the jefe político to carry out the laws. This person also heard cases appealed from the local justices of the peace. New Mexico's jefe político was like a governor. Indeed, many historians have since called these political chiefs governors. Besides its political chief, New Mexico had a small legislative body. Its members were usually the political chief's close friends. but this branch of government had no real power. Its only power was to offer advice. So a legislative body is one that makes laws. And in the same way that a president or a governor chooses a group of people as their advisors, that's really what this group of people was like. At the local level, New Mexicans still had their alcaldes. The alcaldes served as justices of the peace. They sometimes served as mayors. In each of New Mexico's largest settlements, a special elected official ran the local government. New Mexico's government worked well some of the time. At other times, it broke down. Under Mexican law, for example, there was no trial by jury. Justice was left to those in charge. A person could appeal an alcalde's decision to the political chief. That, however, was the one appeal that might bring results. The nearest regular court was in Guadalajara. This northern Mexican town was nearly 1,300 miles from the towns of the upper Rio Grande. When the government worked well, whether the government worked well depended on how good the office holders were. The jefe politico had the greatest power. Most political chiefs during the Mexican period were native New Mexicans. As New Mexicans, they could better control the territory's affairs. They could count on the support of the people. So question one, what government officials did New Mexico have during the Mexican period, and how well did the government work? You've got the judges, the alcaldes, you've got the jefe politico, who's like a governor, and you've got a small legislative body that gives the jefe politico his advice. And in local places, they had justices of the peace, and they also had mayors in each of the towns. All right. Our next question. Why were New Mexico's churches in shape during the Mexican period? The church is in sad shape. I believe the question should actually read, why were they in sad shape? Oh, fixed it. And now I've lost there we go. No one ran the affairs of the Catholic Church effectively. The main reason was New Mexico's isolation. Its churches had been turned over to local parishes. This had begun, you may recall, in the late 1700s. By the start of the Mexican period, only a few Franciscans remained in New Mexico, and not until 1833 did a bishop travel to New Mexico. This bishop was the first high-ranking church official to visit New Mexico's churches in more than 70 years. He came from Durango, a town located more than 500 miles south of El Paso. His visit to New Mexico had two effects. First, New Mexican churches now fell under high-ranking church official. Second, the Franciscan priests were gone from New Mexico forever. They kind of blew it when it came to the churches. With the Franciscans gone, New Mexico's churches awaited priests sent from Durango. These priests would run the churches in the towns. They would oversee the mission churches in the pueblos. But too few priests came. Those priests who did come witnessed the breaking up of New Mexico's churches. The missions, for example, became the property of the Pueblo Indians. And the new caretakers allowed most missions to fall into ruin. Only 5 pueblos had priests. Churches in the towns were not much better off. Parish priests had to rely upon the people to support the church. With little support given in most parishes, the priests led hard lives. Their churches fell into disrepair. Still, other churches remained without parish priests. Whole areas, as a result, had no regular Sunday Mass. So that answers question number 2, why the churches were in such sad shape during the Mexican period. So we're going to take a pause here and learn about the printing press. Now, the printing press is as important an invention in the past as the internet was to all of us in the present. It made information move much quicker. And in terms of education in New Mexico and medicine and intelligence, things improved. So let's learn about New Mexico's first printing press. New Mexico's first newspaper had a brief history, but the press on which it was printed had both a long and colorful history. After El Crepúsculo failed, Father Antonio Jose Martinez began to use the press. The parish priest of Taos, Martinez, was active in local politics. He also ran a private school that educated many New Mexican leaders. This school served New Mexico both before and after it became a United States territory. The press itself turned out both educational and religious materials. During the last years of the Mexican period, the printing press again changed hands. It was used once to publish newspapers. Officials got the use of the press by either buying it or renting it from Martinez. They printed two government newspapers in 1844 and 1845. The newspaper La Verdad, meaning the truth, did not last long, nor did the newspaper El Payo de Nuevo Mexico, meaning the countrymen of New Mexico. The printing press fell to the United States Army when it took over Santa Fe in 1846. On this press, United States officials printed the Kearney Code. Kearney Code told Mexicans what rules they would follow as United States citizens. You will learn more about the Kearney Code in the chapter that follows. That's after the Mexican-American War. All right, so back to the regular stuff. The churches sucked and were falling apart. Now, question number 4. Why was Albino Perez unpopular? No, I'm sorry. What conditions caused unrest in New Mexico during the 1830s? The 1830s are a troubled time. New Mexicans were deprived in other ways as well. The first public schools appeared during the Mexican period, yet most of the teachers were not well trained. And in 1834, the public schools closed for lack of funds. Also in 1834, New Mexico got its first printing press. See what we just talked about. In the same year, New Mexico got its first newspaper. It was a weekly named El Crepúsculo, meaning the dawn. However, this newspaper lasted only a month. Indeed, the 1830s were a troubled time. They were a time of money shortages. They were also a time of growing unrest. In 1837, Mexico got a new constitution. A constitution is basically a document that forms that is the basis of a government. It gave even more power to the Mexican central government, and once more, New Mexico's government changed. New Mexico now had 2, later 3, large units of government. These units were responsible to New Mexico's chief leader. This leader was once again called governor. The governor, in turn, was responsible to the central government in Mexico. New Mexicans then lost some control over their own affairs, so that's going to tick some people off. The timing was bad, as events would soon show. In 1836, for example, Anglo-Americans in Texas revolted against Mexican rule. This is the title page of the first book printed in New Mexico, when and where it was published. Cuaderno de autografía dedicado a los niños de los señores Martínez de Taos. The Texans fought for and won their independence. They formed the Republic of Texas. Next door to a free Texas was New Mexico. So for a time, Texas was actually its own country. I think some of them would like to be that again, but apparently they can't control their power grid, so it'd be like giving a gun to a child. Anyway, in New Mexico, more and more Anglo-Americans made their presence known. They entered the area as traders and trappers. They set up businesses. They also brought to New Mexico ideas about freedom. They said that people had the right to govern themselves. New Mexicans had no reason for wanting to overthrow Mexican rule. Still, the potential for unrest was now present in New Mexico. So to answer number 3, they were starting to get some ideas of freedom, and they were starting to dislike the government of Mexico because the government of Mexico was reducing some of their control of the New Mexico territory. The Revolt of 1837. New Mexico gets a new governor. So that we're going to get to why was Albino Perez unpopular with many New Mexicans. Unrest did in time surface. It took the form of revolt. What set off the revolt was the appointment in 1835 of a new governor, Colonel Albino Perez. Perez was disliked by some Mexicans for several reasons. Here we go, answering question number 4. First, he was not a native New Mexican, and he was an officer in the Mexican army. Second, Perez planned to control the affairs of New Mexico. He did not believe in local government. Third, he announced new taxes. Nobody likes new taxes under orders from the central government. So those are 3 reasons why people did not like Colonel Albino Perez. Some of the new taxes applied to foreigners who did business in New Mexico. Other taxes affected the economic well-being of native New Mexicans. Perez taxed woodcutters. He taxed sheep that were herded through Santa Fe on their way to market. He taxed dances and other public performances. Perez also announced that all those without jobs would be arrested. And while Perez opened public schools, his new law placed many restrictions on parents. So even the reopening of schools was not popular. As a result of Perez's actions, people hated his government. In time, an underground movement opposed Perez. People who lived along the Rio Grande from Albuquerque northward joined this movement. So did people living in the northern mountain villages. So too did the Pueblo peoples. Pueblo Indians joined the movement against Perez to protect their ways of living. Under Mexican rule, New Mexicans Indians enjoyed citizenship and land rights. They continued their traditional ways of living. Fearing Perez's strong rule, many of them now joined other New Mexican settlers. All that was needed to set off the revolt was a single incident. So you had everyone in New Mexico who hated this guy Perez. What incident, you wonder, started the revolt in 1837? The summer of 1837 found the Perez government short of money. There was not enough money to supply the government. There was not even enough money to supply the army in Santa Fe. So Perez asked Anglo-American traders in Santa Fe for their help. And they gave Perez the help he wanted. The traders lent him money for needed supplies. However, some officials kept some of the money for themselves. In other words, they were guilty of a crime called graft. Perez fired those known to be corrupt, but Perez angered local people by punishing some native New Mexicans. And when he punished an alcalde at Santa Cruz de la Cañada, the revolt began. So that's the incident. A lot of these people were pocketing money for themselves, and when he punished an alcalde who was a native New Mexican, they said, enough is enough, rebellion is on. What happened started simply enough. The alcalde was arrested for graft. He was jailed at La Cañada. The village lay 25 miles northwest of Santa Fe. Rebels opposed to Perez soon rallied in La Cañada. Among them were Indians from the northern pueblos. The rebels first marched on the jail. They freed the prisoner. Second, they drew up a plan. The plan asked that New Mexico be made a Mexican state. It further said that the rebels would not pay taxes or obey tax officials. The rebels agreed to this on August 3rd. Once their plan was known, the rebels were joined by others. The so-called Chimayo rebellion had begun. All right. What happened to Perez during the revolt in 1837? Well, you see it right there. Perez is overthrown. Perez was in Santa Fe when he learned of the rebellion. Believing the rebels weak, he left for La Cañada with only 100 militia. Most were from Santo Domingo Pueblo. Some soldiers from Santa Fe went along as well. Perez and his force left Santa Fe on August 7th. They took one cannon with them. Early the next morning, the rebels ringed Perez and his men near the Black Mesa of San Ildefonso. Perez tried to talk with the rebels, but the time for talking was past. The rebels attacked. Abandoned by the people of Santo Domingo, Perez and 23 soldiers retreated to Santa Fe. They left behind the cannon. 6 or 7 of their number had died in the fighting. It was still August 8th when Perez and some others left Santa Fe. They headed south along the river road. It was late at night. They fled for their lives. The next morning revealed there was no escape. Indians blocked the road to safety. All those trying to escape now acted on their own. Perez gambled and walked back toward to Santa Fe. He hoped he would not be seen. Such was not the case. Trailed by Pueblo Indians, Perez could not escape. He lost his head to his captors. The Indians took their prize to Santa Fe, joining rebels in the capital. The rebels celebrated by using Perez's head as a football. So imagine a bunch of lovely people playing soccer with a head. Picture that in your head? No, don't picture that in your head. It's awful, awful, awful violence. Wrong. But now you know what happened to the unpopular Albino Perez, and that answers number 6. We get to number 7. How did Manuel Armijo come to power? The Armijo government. Armijo comes to power. The rebels met on August 10th to choose a native New Mexican governor. They might have chosen Albuquerque's Manuel Armijo, a former governor. He helped organize the underground movement against Perez. Instead, the rebels chose Jose Gonzalez, a native of Ranchos de Taos. Armijo at first stayed in Santa Fe to work with the new governor. Tiring of this, he left the capital and returned to Albuquerque. Soon, Armijo began to gather a group to oppose Gonzalez. On September 8th, Armijo and his group announced they would oppose the new governor. At the same time, they announced their loyalty to Mexico. Armijo and his followers marched on Santa Fe near the end of September 1837. Taking Armijo's advice to stay out of Mexican affairs, the Indians remained in their pueblos. Armijo's forces took Santa Fe without a fight. Governor Gonzalez had fled northward. In time, Armijo ordered the execution of 4 rebel leaders. He also ordered the execution of Gonzalez, who was captured at a later date. These executions occurred early in 1838. That's how Armijo comes to power. Armijo had at last crushed the rebels. By doing so, he became a hero in Mexico. At the same time, he named himself New Mexico's new governor. The Mexican government allowed him to remain in power. Armijo served as governor for most of the next 8 years. He ruled New Mexico with an iron hand. Okay, the next question. What was the Texas Santa Fe expedition and what were its results? The Texas Santa Fe expedition takes place. The revolt in New Mexico in 1837 troubled the Mexican government. Mexican officials suspected that Anglo-Americans had aided the anti-Perez rebels. Such was not the case. In fact, Anglo-Americans had supplied Perez. Some of them had later given money to Armijo for his actions against the rebels. They had welcomed New Mexico's return of order in 1838. Still, Mexican officials struck out at Anglo-Americans. In New Mexico, for example, Armijo blamed the Anglo-Americans, these are people from the United States, for every problem. He took away some of their property. He hurt the Santa Fe trade by taxing each Anglo-American wagon bringing goods into the capital, and he acted harshly against a force of 270 Texans. So there on the left is Governor Manuel Armijo, and there on the right, you see members of the Texas Santa Fe expedition marching to Mexico after their capture. Okay, so you've got Anglo-Americans from the United States being blamed for things, and from Texas, which at this point is its own country. The 270 Texans approached New Mexico in the summer of 1841. They said their visit was to discuss trade and military matters. The president of Texas might really have wanted to conquer New Mexico. Whatever their goal, the Texans never reached Santa Fe. Instead, they got lost on the plains. They lost their horses to roving Indians. They ran short of food and supplies. So when Armijo promised them a pardon, the Texans gave up. Manuel Armijo promptly broke his promise. He sent the captives on a 2,000-mile march to Mexico City. Tied together and given little to eat, the Texans suffered every step of the way. Those who lagged behind were shot. Some who made it to Mexico were released, some escaped. Most captives did not, however, gain their freedom until 1842. Besides what happened to the captives, the Texas expedition had other results. First, bad feelings had grown up between New Mexicans and Texans, and some of that is still around today. These groups distrusted one another for a long time. Second, Armijo was once again a hero for the Mexican government. We'll go back to that in a minute. He had saved New Mexico from an invading force. After this, his power to rule New Mexico had few, if any, limits. So this expedition from Texas, they said it was to discuss trade. It could have been an attempt to take over Mexico by Texas. It didn't work. The expedition failed because they got lost. They didn't have enough supplies. They were captured by New Mexico, and things went bad for them. But this gave Armijo amazing control of the New Mexico territory. And now let's learn about Gertrudis Barcelo. And sometimes I just can't talk. That's her right there. Looks like she's smoking. During the Mexican period, Gertrudis Barcelo fascinated the people of New Mexico. Having spent much of her youth in Taos and Tomé, she settled in Santa Fe. There, during the 1840s, she ran a gambling house. Its location was the corner of San Francisco Street and Burro Alley. The building itself ran to Palace Avenue on the north. As this gambling house's owner, Gertrudis Barcelo, better known as Doña Tules, became famous. To the gambling house of Doña Tules came the high and mighty. Among them was Governor Manuel Armijo. Huge mirrors hung on the walls. Brussels carpets brought from the United States covered the dirt floors. Homemade chandeliers, lighted by many candles, dangled from the ceiling. In the building's long hall were held New Mexico's grand dances. High-ranking government and army personnel attended these balls. Admission to the dances was by invitation only. The favorite game of chance in the 1840s was Monte. Here, too, Doña Tules gained fame. She was considered the finest Monte dealer in New Mexico, if not all Mexico. Monte was played at a table with Mexican cards. These cards were quite different from those we know. Atop the table was a red or green cover divided into 4 squares. The dealer laid a card face up in each of the squares. The players bet on their cards. The dealer or player then drew cards one at a time from the bottom of the deck. As winning and losing cards were drawn, the results were announced. The winners collected their money. The game began anew. Doña Tules remained popular even after the conquest of Santa Fe by the United States. She was a favorite of the United States Army officers. In fact, she warned them in December 1846 about the planned rebellion against them. Doña Tules died in 1851. She had, during her lifetime, amassed quite a fortune. One story has it that money she sent to a bank in St. Louis never arrived. Instead, robbers stole the money. They hid at least part of it. The story further says that $150,000 still lies buried some 40 miles east of Taos. See if you can go dig that up and we can share it. Whatever the truth of this story, Doña Tules died a wealthy woman. She had a fancy funeral. She was also buried with the highest honors of the Catholic Church. The church services alone cost up to $1,600. In death, as in life, Doña Tules left her mark on New Mexico's history. When I grew up and learned history, they didn't tell me about many of the cool women in history. This one is a totally badass woman in New Mexico. Gertrudis Barceló, I give you. All right, now back to Armijo. Now he's unpopular. Let's see what our next question. How did Armijo handle land grants while he was in power? And also question 10, how did most New Mexicans feel about Armijo? A hero in Mexico, Armijo angered most New Mexicans. His rule was mostly harsh and unfair. Amid the poverty of New Mexico, Armijo gambled and wore expensive clothes. In time, he became even more hated than Perez had been. But Armijo also had some supporters. Those included people who support the governor bought with land. As governor, Armijo could make land grants. By law, land grants were limited in size, but Armijo ignored that law. He made several land grants of more than 100,000 acres. He made 3 land grants that were huge. All 3 land grants lay in what was the northern New Mexico. One, 1,000,000 acres in size, was north of Taos. It is today in Colorado. A second grant, also in today's Colorado, was farther east. A third, the land grant that in time belonged to Lucien Maxwell, spread across northeastern New Mexico. In making land grants, Armijo usually kept for himself a share in the land. This was true of 2 of 3 land grants mentioned above. Armijo's support was not, however, strong or loyalty. So what he tried to do with land grants, and he broke the law by giving huge land grants, he tried to buy loyalty from people who supported him because he knew he was unpopular. It didn't help. And also people knew he was taking some of the land for himself, which didn't help either. Nor was support for the Mexican government in New Mexico. One revolt against Mexican rule had occurred in 1837. Discontent against Armijo grew throughout the 1840s. New Mexicans, to be sure, made no move to overthrow Armijo, yet neither Armijo nor the Mexican government could expect much help if they were challenged. All right. And you know what that means. Yes, it's time once again for Angry Cow. Da, 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 da. I'm going to quiz you now. Angry Cow says, I'm going to quiz you now. Yeah.